Okay, welcome along everyone to this Safety Knowledge Hub event on a sunny Friday afternoon here in Wellington at least. My name's Ian McCauley. I'm a team lead safe system support in the road safety team at Waka Kotahi, and I also look after some of the safety research projects that we generate through the research programme. So today we've got one presentation on supporting people to drive more safely in Aotearoa. We have two presenters. First is Dr. Joel Burton. Joel is a senior researcher within WSP's People and Technology Insights team, where he serves as a behavioural specialist. During his time at WSP, Joel has carried out many behavioural change projects ranging from the impacts of roadside delineation on drivers to changes in cyclists' behaviour due to infrastructure changes. Our second presenter, almost said performer, is Dr. Jared Thomas. Jared's an international recognised expert in transport psychology and delivery of human-centred design. He has a particular interest in understanding the diverse behaviours, needs and limitations of our people to ensure our cities and streets are safe, usable and optimised for people. So in a second, I'll ask the presenters to begin. If you do have any questions or comments, can you please pop them in the chat and the presenters will address them either as they go or once they've finished. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Joel and Jared.
Thank you very much. E tupu ake aho ki Papakua, ke te alakalangi ki tai aiho e noho ana, ko Joel Burton taku ingoa. I'm originally from Papakua. I currently live and work in Te Alakalangi, which is in Oaha, and you may call me Joel. Questions we would like to be left at the end of both of our presentations today, as one kind of feeds straight into the other. So there'll probably be questions, hopefully, that you'll go, Joel, I want to ask you that. And then Jared will be able to answer that and you'll go, Jared's answered it for me. So without further ado, today I would like to talk to you about effective alternatives to penalties for repeat driving offenders. So you might ask, why are we looking at this today? This is mainly due to Road Zero, New Zealand's road safety strategy from 2020 to 2030, with hopefully zero road deaths by 2050. But particularly, I'll draw your attention to the quote that we have here, which is a new approach to dealing with high-risk drivers, providing for alternative resolutions to convictions. So effectively, we're wanting to look at a system that is different to what we're already supplying. So we have a penalty-based system and we're wanting to find alternatives that address our recidivist high-risk behaviours, as well as being a more equitable system than what we may potentially currently have. So what do we define by high-risk behaviours in Aotearoa? So for the purposes of this piece of work for Waka Kotahi, we identified 6 high-risk behaviours across the Aotearoa road network. As you can see from this graph, these are our deaths and serious injuries, our DSIs, from 2015 to 2020. And these are the contributing factors to crashes on our roads. So instantly you can see from the graph, our biggest influencer on crashes is alcohol and drug use whilst driving. This is followed by speeding, then seatbelt.
You've just cut out your sound there, Joel.
Somebody else muted me. Gosh, I didn't think I was going to be that boring that quickly into the talk. Just be careful when people are muting. You could end up muting others, such as myself. So fatigue being inattentive behaviour and mobile phone use. And inattentive behaviour, as I said, there's some distractions from passengers, looking at the scenery outside, etc. And mobile phone use can be considered inattentive, but we also do, in this case, class it as its own crash contributor. So these are, as you can see, the high-risk behaviours within Aotearoa. So these are the ones that we wanted to focus on. So what do we have for dealing with these high-risk behaviours in New Zealand? So when you do one of these traffic offences, how do we currently address that within Aotearoa? What does the justice system have as its levers for changing behaviour? So currently we have fines and infringement notices. We have demerit points. Demerit points are if you perform some form of activity such as speeding and a police officer is there to give you a speeding ticket, they can also attribute you with demerit points. In New Zealand, you can get 100 demerit points and then you lose your licence. So leading on to losing your licence, we can also, if you particularly bad driver, you can lose your license and be disqualified pretty much on the spot. And then on the top of that, you can lose your license, you can have demerit points, you can have a fine, and you can also lose your vehicle. So the police do have the ability to impound a vehicle if needs be. And then finally, probably our harshest penalty within the system that's available to us is incarceration. And obviously, this is only ever done for very recidivist, very unsafe drivers. So, how do our current penalties relate to our high-risk behaviours? So going back to our drink driving, our speeding, our inattentive behaviour and fatigue and seatbelt use, you'll see that we have almost fines for all of them, apart from fatigue driving. Fatigue driving is a bit special. It's a difficult one to prove, and there is actually no specific code for fatigue driving. It's usually bundled in with other things when there is a crash. Demerit points, you can see you've got those for drink driving, speeding and inattentive behaviour, but not again for fatigue driving or seatbelt use. And then finally, we do actually have kind of alternatives in New Zealand already, but these are specifically for drink driving, and this is in relation to a system called an alcohol interlock. Basically, an alcohol interlock is where you have been convicted of drink driving offence, or some people voluntarily put these on yourself. It's a device that is fitted to the car that you have to pass a breath test on before the vehicle will allow you to drive. So these are implemented currently within New Zealand, and they are an alternative to, say, taking someone's car completely off them or incarcerating them. So it can be used in conjunction with other methods for changing behaviour, hopefully. So we're talking about high-risk behaviour, and we're talking about recidivist behaviour specifically. So recidivism is when somebody performs an action, a traffic offence in this case, and then continues to perform that action over and over again. So somebody who is a high recidivist is somebody who will continually basically be in front of the law, either being fined or ticketed or incarcerated and popping in and out of jail. So recidivist behaviour in relation to our high risk events, here's just some information. This is 2005 to 2014. And as you can see, those driving under the influence of alcohol, we actually find the majority of people who do that are recidivist offenders. They have multiple offences for drink driving, rather than, say, our mobile phone users who get pinged and penalised. They are generally first-time offenders, so they don't go out every single day and basically get pinged for using their mobile phone. And speeding's in between, but still the majority, small majority, but the majority of speeders are generally recidivist offenders. So what's the purpose of our research that we're talking about today? So we wanted to effectively investigate some potential alternatives, penalties for our recidivist repeat offenders in New Zealand who show these high-risk behaviours. How can we be more fair, equitable, and change these behaviours than currently the system that we are using? So how we did that is we first started out with a literature review, and this was looking at both national and international literature, and looking at these alternatives where we identified them and their underlying success factors attached to them. This was supplemented by a survey of international experts, so other road authorities users. We asked them, how do you approach this? And we also had 2 interactive workshops within Aotearoa with representative groups for if these interventions are to be implemented, who would be the people doing that, so, such as Waka Kotahi and the New Zealand Police. So what did we identify? We have identified a group of alternatives, and we'll kind of classify them into 2 lots. Very briefly, we have alternatives that lead to crash reduction. So we call this as effective measures. These are direct correspondence. The alternative shows there is a reduction in crashes, and that is the safety outcome. And just the other ones we show usually have some form of indirect association with safety. So there's a reduction in drink driving, or there's a reduction in speeding. So those are what we would call indirect effective measures. But for the direct ones, so these ones that you see on the screen are ones that relate directly to a crash reduction. So I'll talk a little bit about the good behaviour bond further down. Traffic schools are systems predominantly used in the US as well as other countries, where somebody who receives, say, a speeding ticket has the opportunity to go to a classroom environment, sit down with other people who have received speeding tickets, go through a a class environment with teaching from the front. These are usually, interestingly, they usually have a comedic approach to it. When I say comedic, it's an engaging approach. So they make it fun to be there, as fun as you can be sitting in a class where you're trying to get out of a speeding ticket. And the idea is you go through this, and in the class you get signed off to say, yes, this person was attentive, yes, they were here, they answered the right questions, therefore the speeding fine is not applied. The license extension incentive is basically going to a group of people and saying, if you don't have a crash or another traffic offence in the next 12 months, your license renewal that you are due for at this period in time will be free. We'll just wipe the cost of that. We won't charge you for that. But if you do crash, speed, drink, drive, you'll then be, if you still have your license afterwards, obviously, you'll have to pay for that renewal like normal. What's interesting about that one is you want to incentivize people that have shown poor behavior in the past, because if you only incentivize people who have shown no poor behaviors, actually what you find is that they lead to actually having more crashes, because effectively what we think and what the researchers think is you're telling these people they're fantastic drivers already and you're going to be even more fantastic, and then their safety behaviors fall away. Whereas the people who have had unsafe behaviors, you're telling them, hey, if you pick up your game, you get to save money, and that leads to actually better crash outcomes and crash reductions. And finally, there's driver monitoring use in vehicle with data recorders. So this is usually a commercial approach. Fleet of vehicle operators, the study that we looked at here was in the Netherlands. A fleet of operators was told, hey, can you tell us how many crashes you've had? We've had X, right? We want to install tracking in your vehicles that say acceleration, braking, how many crash events you have, and pair that with feedback to your employees to say, hey, we noticed you're speeding and so forth. And instead of getting a ticket, what we'll do is we want to talk to you about it. That system of that feedback and monitoring actually led to a reduction in crashes based on real-time information off the drivers. So a system like that would be E-roads, if anybody is familiar with it. Waka Kotahi has it implemented on our vehicles, WSP has it implemented, as do other fleet operators around New Zealand. It's a system for effectively monitoring driver behaviour and being able to give feedback both in real time and later managerial reviews. So as I said, there were the direct crash safety, and then there's these proxy safety measures. So these are some of the ones that we identified in the proxy safety measures. So that indirect crashes through reductions in speed and drink. The two that I'll kind of focus on here are the alcohol interlocks, just to give you a wee bit more background around that. So these are a system that is implemented in New Zealand for drink drivers and recidivist drink drivers. And the idea is you fix the alcohol interlock. Drivers obviously have that and they can't drive. So funnily enough, you'll find that they don't have many drink driving recidivist rates whilst the alcohol interlock is fitted. Another story once it's removed, which then comes to addressing the underlying cause, which we'll also talk about a little bit later. Another one of interest in here is the driver intervention program called a DIP. Adelaide in Australia runs a very interesting program in that regard. Drivers who are under 25 who have had their license suspended are given the opportunity to either do a DIP course or pay a fine, essentially. And what they found is those ones who did the educational DIP course were shown to have a reduction in further traffic offences than those who chose to just pay the fine or chose to do neither, which you get in trouble if you choose to do neither. So you'd wonder why you would pick that. And finally, there are just the other alternatives. There are specific alternatives within New Zealand which we identified. These were generally assistance-based programs that had a group session component to them. So there are ones like the One for the Road, the Bright Track, the iwi Community Justice Panels, and the Drive Sober programs. These were usually very geocentric things, so they'd be in Auckland or down in Southland or so forth, not national-wide programs. But they were all shown to be effective in reducing recidivist rates. And the people who generally go into these programs are generally drink and drug drivers. But it was really interesting, the One for the Road one, some of the quotes from later, like, I felt safe, to be honest. I think the course was a real eye-opener. I enjoyed the talking and communicating with people in the same or similar situations to myself. And that's really quite important, actually, is being surrounded by other people who are like you, rather than just you are you have a fine, you need to deal with this. You are actually put in with other people who are going through the exact same situation with you, and you can work together. That's the whole point of group sessions, is working together to understand, oh, okay, how do we move forward rather than just going, oh, I have to deal with a fine now, and not addressing any of the underlying causes. So going through all of that, we were able to pull out some principles and underlying success factors that were key for these alternatives to actually work. The first being a consistent screening approach to assigning the interventions to the right groups. And I'll talk about the idea of the right groups a little bit afterwards as well. Where they are kind of the assistance behavioural programs, these need to be theory-driven behaviour change. The content has to be grounded in science, effectively, and this is particularly useful when using things like cognitive behavioural therapy. And the final one is the resources that you apply need to be targeted to how severe, really. So high-risk offenders can have more resources with these targeted alternatives rather than using a tar-all brush. So instead of just having a basic standard for everybody and we don't adjust, these alternatives have to be targeted, and that allows you to put more emphasis and more resource into that, and that can also be supported with technological tools. So after we went through and identified all of these alternatives that we could from the international and national literature, we went through a summarising exercise where we gave a research strength rating to these. So a rating of 0 means there was no controls and there was no data. It's just somebody said, hey, this works well. And it's just like, great, where's the science to back that up? All the way up to 3, which is there was quantitative data with statistical analysis, there was comparisons before and after, matched groups, and the evaluation period was 12 months or longer. So this is just a little snippet. The whole table is obviously in the report if you want to see that. So you can see a couple in there. You can see the traffic schools have a 3, whereas the DIP in South Australia has a 2, and there were a few 1s and 0s in there. So we took the best of those and took them forward to discuss how they could be implemented in New Zealand. So just to very touch on implementation, it's really important, like I said a couple of slides ago, that these need to be targeted. So there needs to be different approaches for different offending behaviour. So we went through a typology exercise of creating a group of 4 typologies that we thought would benefit from different types of interventions. These groups were from a broad target group, which have simple behaviours, oh, I forgot to put my seatbelt on, to our targeted complex behaviours. I always drink and drive, and I always don't wear my seatbelt when I do so, and I love to speed at 160 in a 50 kilometre per hour area. And each of those groups kind of needs a different approach. So take, for instance, our lowest, our unintentionals. These are people that very irregularly offend, but their receptiveness to change is very high. So these are the people who do low-level speeding or forget to put their seatbelt on effectively, maybe for just a very quick trip. They would benefit from driver feedback systems and driver assist systems and classes to reduce their fines. Whereas our high riskers need a holistic intervention approach. Their behaviour is going to continue. They're very resistant to change, and the root cause of the behaviour needs to be addressed rather than the outcome of the behaviour. You can give them as many fines and throw them in jail as many times as you want. It's not going to change because we're not addressing the underlying cause. So they need that holistic intervention, that group or singular therapy, and technological interventions where possible. So that comes to, what do we recommend? So based on our literature, based on our steering group meetings, our stakeholder meetings, our workshops, what we found, our typologies, we came up with 3 potential alternatives that we recommend be implemented in Aotearoa. And that's the driver intervention programs, DUI courts, so it's driving under the influence courts, and the good behaviour bonds. So I'll just very quickly go through each of those. So the good behaviour bond is effectively, what happens is you end up speeding or performing some other event that gives you a traffic offence, and court or the police come up to you and go, you have 1 or 2 choices. You either pay the ticket now if you want, or what you can do is if you tell us that you're not going to offend within the next 12 months, nothing happens. We wipe it. It's perfectly fine. But the caveat being, if you do have another traffic offence within that 12 months, we'll double what the original was. So if you were looking at a 3-month suspension, potentially, what will happen is you will get a 6-month suspension if you don't manage to do those 12 months. Now, this is a really successful program in Australia. It's across all states. 75% of people who are offered this take it up, and of them 80% manage to complete the good behaviour bond without then having a further traffic offence. And this has led to reductions in speeding by 13% in Victoria, as well as 23% reduction in crashes. So that's phenomenal. So it's basically, you tell people, and it's equitable as well. People who might have been having their licence taken off them suddenly have a chance not to. You've got Democles sword with that double suspension. But as I said, 80% of the people who choose to take this course actually pass it, which is really good. Our second recommendation was driving under the influence courts. So these, as we know from the research, lead to a 14% reduction in recidivism. So these are courts that are purely dedicated to drink driving events. It's not just a court that looks at drink driving and other things. They are purely for drink driving. Now, we do have this in New Zealand. It is actually being implemented in Auckland, but that's the only place it has been implemented. And we have seen there very comparable reduction in recidivism, 16%, compared to the international literature. So we are recommending that that system be applied to Aotearoa as a whole. And what's nice about having a whole system court in place is they can then do recommendations to feed into our third recommendation, which is referrals into driver and driver intervention programs. So these programs are basically for our very recidivist, very hard to change. So these are the programs that look at the underlying cause, that is what's driving this behavior. How can we change that so you don't become a recidivist anymore? And we find that there are these programs that are being run in Aotearoa, some of them. For instance, the One for the Road program has seen a 20% reduction in drink driving offending after being part of the program. The great thing about these is these are to target the resources where they need to be as either self-referral or referral by the court, and they help the people who need it the most. So we then took all our recommendations and we put them into 3 themes. So our first theme was effectively recommendations for specific alternatives. So that is the good behaviour bond. That's the driving under the influence courts. So we want the good behaviour bond across the entirety of Aotearoa. We want driving under the influence courts everywhere, not just Auckland. And that uses supportive technology such as interlocks and the recommendation into driver intervention programs where needed. So we will have a pathway effectively from those courts to the intervention for the people who need it. And then we want to develop and deliver a international national driver intervention program, building on One for the Road or other similar programs in that vein. So those national court systems can feed into national programs instead of having to either go up to Auckland or down to the bottom of the Southland to actually get these treatments that people so desperately need. Our theme 2 is in relation to governance, funding and strategies. So this is saying we need to address where this funding will come from to address these recidivist high-risk behaviours, especially for the very high-risk recidivist drink drivers and so forth. They need that holistic approach with that therapeutic component, and that is not cheap, unfortunately. We want to review central funding, or we recommend that there is a review of central funding for these appropriate alternatives. So having one pool and all of the money can come from there rather than every region having to find the funding for themselves. We also say that it should be evaluate and build upon the existing alternatives that we already have. So that's the use of the alcohol interlocks, those One for the Roads programs, the Drive Sober programs, etc. Where we have those in Aotearoa and we know they're successful, we should build on them and continue to evaluate. And we also make the recommendation that we, waka kotahi and so forth, and Te Manatu Waka, keep on saying to commercial fleet operators and so forth, we think the use of technology for digital logbooks, for instant driver feedback, intelligent speed adaptation, those are really good things. You should continue to do that because we know that it leads to better driver behaviour even before that driver behaviour is picked up in the judicial system. And our final recommendation, it was theme 3, was around evaluation and guidance. So there should be a consistent approach to how reoffenders are receiving their appropriate support. So coming back to that consistency of it, the right alternative should be applied to the right behaviour. There should be consistent monitoring and evaluation of alternatives that are in place to ensure that ongoing funding is going to the right ones. So if we have a proper evaluation mechanism in place, that shows that these are working, we can go, great, you get more funding, continue to go. But to back that up, we should also suggest that, we have suggested, that there is development around guidance around how to evaluate programs for providers specifically, to be able to go, we've evaluated, we've followed the guidelines that you've set out for us, here's the minimum requirements, we've met them, can we please have some more funding? And then a central funding body will be going, great, you've evaluated the way we want, and we can give you the funding as you need fit. So I'd just like to obviously thank our the inputs from our steering groups, as well as our international experts, our authors, and our technical reviewers on this project. Any further correspondence or so forth, you can talk to Jared, who's about to come up next. Thank you very much.
Or you can talk to Joel as well.
Well, you can talk to me. You can talk to me if you want. Happy to discuss this. Yeah, I saw you were answering some questions in the background, Jared, there. Were you happy to do that, or shall we bundle them up at the end?
Let's wrap it up at the end.
Sounds good.
Otherwise, yeah, and then we can have a really good discussion. So I think both programs sort of line in together nicely. Is that coming up okay for people?
Yes.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, kia ora, Joel. Tēnā koutou katoa no Ngarani me arangi oku tupuna. E noho ana ahau ki hehitingi, he whanonga putai oa ahau, ko Jared Thomas, taku ingoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us on your Friday afternoon. I'm Jared Thomas. I'm a behavioural scientist working with Joel. I was the principal researcher looking at incentives to encourage safer driving. So today we'll talk through in this presentation, background on why we should look at incentives, our approach to this research, discuss some different types of incentives, and some of the underlying things that we think from the research make them successful. So if anyone's looking at an incentive program, we've got some key tips for you. A few case study examples with a special focus on Aotearoa, New Zealand, and leading into recommendations. So why look at incentives? Because we want to use all of the tools in our toolbox when we're taking a safe systems approach. And we want to look at the latest evidence around this, back it up. Where this sits within our strategy, within the Road to Zero, it fits really nicely within three particular focus areas around road user choices, worker-related road safety, the safety culture of our organisations, and then in that speed management space, so some of the really good work around environmental speed management, so the speed feedback signs and things like that, where we're providing feedback to drivers, can we incentivise it? And it links, I think, really nicely with the work Joel's just presented. So he's looked kind of at the high risk end of the typologies of people. You could think about the incentives fitting in under that group that he discussed around the unintentional or irregular offenders as well. So kind of together, using these tools to look at alongside our penalty system, how can these tools complement our existing penalty system? So what are incentives? That's a big one, it's complicated, but for the purposes of what we're talking about within this research, incentives are action systems or approaches that promote or encourage desired behaviour. So the key aspect is that there is some aspect of this, of encouragement for a safer driving behaviour, essentially. So if you think about our external vehicle feedback signs, if it only provides a message when you're going over the speed limit, that's not an incentive. But if it provides some positive feedback, so positive colours like use of green that we associate with good, smiley faces, that's starting to imbue an incentive within the intervention in place. Probably the more familiar incentives to us are the extrinsic ones, so the monetary, like insurance discounts. But there's also a range of intrinsic, which are really important to tap into. So that innate ability to tap into approval or recognition, meeting our peer norms or expectations around things. I really like the Volkswagen New Zealand example, which ties back it's something you're looking at in vehicle really regularly to actually a reminder of a safe thing. I want to get home. I'm a dad myself. I want to get home to my kids. And I changed my driving behavior once I had kids. So just that constant reminder or nudge that's in the right place for the right person, and a regular reminder. We kind of, I guess, as kids growing up, we receive a lot of feedback on our behavior and we get rewarded for cleaning up your room, etc. But as adults, we don't necessarily get those nudges and feedbacks. We become more independent. So how do we put a feedback loop that isn't, I made good time on that trip, back into how we look at safer driving behavior? So what did we do? We wanted to find the evidence, and the most recent evidence around what's working and what isn't around incentives. So we looked internationally and within New Zealand on incentives that can encourage safer driving. So we looked at the literature. We followed that up with expert interviews, both with international and national experts. And then we looked at how do we bring some of this into New Zealand? So we held a community of practice workshop to try and look at the practicality of implementing some of this, or what are the pathways for uptake of some of this, and where is the low-hanging fruit around incentives, and fed those through into recommendations. So tried to make it really practical. That was the intent. So types of incentives, there's a whole range. We've broadly grouped them into 4 areas just to keep it simple and for the structure of the report. So there's that environmental feedback I've just talked about before. Really good example of Slow for Sam study I really love in Brisbane, which has been quite effective at reducing speed. So we've got a table like this in the report for those that are interested, which goes through all of them, but this is just showing you a snapshot. In-vehicle is the next row down. So in-vehicle technology, Joel touched on this as well. We found studies where, like this farmer one in the United States, where interestingly, the in-vehicle tech is one element, but then the parental component building in, especially with our sort of novice driver type group, that was even more effective. So the combination of in-vehicle feedback plus parental feedback within that space was quite powerful. Another example is, and it's that ongoing feedback loop that the in-vehicle tech has provided. That's the key aspect there. Reward scheme, so that's that insurance concept. And again, that's been done often focused in on our younger, higher risk drivers. So Netherlands have got a good example of that. There's plenty of other examples around insurance schemes. And then the policy type environment and what can we do there. Less evaluation of these, unfortunately. Some of the ones that have come through aren't necessarily linked into policy in the end, but they were quite neat concepts, like the speed camera lottery. If you haven't heard of that one before, I think a lot of people probably have on this call, but it's the concept that the drivers who drive at or under the speed limit are entered into the lottery to win money, and the money comes directly from the fines paid by motorists who've been caught speeding. There's something quite beautiful about that. That loop that's quite nice. It was actually only a promotional campaign that was hoping to get policy implementation. So there's obviously challenges in implementing that sort of thing, but the concept of it was quite neat in terms of that beautiful circular loop. And there are policies that have been put in place that are listed out in the report. So what are some top tips to consider? And these are really important to go through. So I think I'll just run through them quickly. So immediacy is really important. Again, that feedback loop component. So, and small, frequent incentives are better than larger, less regular ones to get that ongoing behavior loop, especially around behaviors like speed, for example. Intrinsic incentives were more closely linked to that sustained behavior change. So the concept that an extrinsic or monetary one, you're really linking the behavior to the money reward as opposed to the underlying reason why I want to do this behavior. So the concept that the extinction of the behavior might become quite quick if you just take away the money. Whereas if you link to the intrinsic, it might continue on. A layered example, layered incentives or multiple incentives came through really quite strongly as well, especially that extrinsic one, the money to hook people in and get the uptake, and then the intrinsic to engage in the sustained behavior. So that extrinsic and intrinsic link was really important, and multiple angles, like multiple intrinsic incentives as well, can increase your audience, because if you're not getting people in to your incentive scheme, then you're not changing their behavior. So that idea of widening the audience. Joel touched on this already. An incentive which is earned based on a change in your behavior is more effective than just rewarding an existing safe behavior. Leveraging cognitive biases, and there's a range of these, like loss aversion, but gains-based messages like the one on the right, respect every right, is really powerful campaign. Better than perhaps the faster that you go, the bigger the mess, which fixates in on the more crashes, or the loss-based, if you like, approach to messaging. So that positive, good behavior focus is what's quite good there. Simple. So a lot of the studies that we looked at seatbelt use, because it's a one-off behavior that you do at the beginning. It's an easier to change compared with more complex behaviors that we have on our network. So it's ongoing behaviors like speed, where you've got a lot of factors into why you speed the way you do, more complex. So simple behaviors, easy to change. Complex might need more layering, more help. And then homogeneity of the group. So easier to target an incentive if you know the motivations of the group. So homogeneity helps you understand what's going to motivate them, and also potentially an easier mechanism to deliver the incentive program. Often we pick on schools in this space, and that does work, and that's in the literature as well. Bringing in expert interviews as well as the literature, we identified some particular areas where we thought positive incentive uptake within New Zealand could get strengthened. So focusing in on that younger or novice driver group, it's a neat entry point. They've already got a lot of effort or motivation around learning. The younger group is more influenced by peers and whānau, more likely to sign up for incentive schemes than older groups. So that's a real opportunity. In the workplace as well, comes through really strongly. There's feedback loops within workplaces, pay, recognition. There's an organisational desire for safety, and it can get linked into your reputation within your organisation as well. So that space is also a really good target group, and where there's a lot of evidence already. Layering or multiple incentives was again raised by the experts. It's really important not just to be a one-trick pony when you're putting together your program. It's unfortunately, it makes evaluation a little bit trickier if you've got multiple things going on. Which of them is the thing that worked? But that layering is really important. It's just harder to evaluate. And then insurance-based incentives alongside technology. Again, if we can get that ongoing reward scheme or incentive in place, that's one mechanism where you can put it in. So I'll talk through a few examples that we've got. Drive program in New Zealand. So this is a combination of Waka Kotahi, ACC, Ministry of Education, looking at how do we help our younger drivers get through our graduated driver licensing scheme. And there's some neat work done in the background to this within the Go Drive app on the left, and also some of the resources that are provided within the scheme to create that active group learning. So this taps into some really neat aspects around things like gamification and fun, making it a fun process, providing recognition. So those practice rank ups, I'm up to gold now. So it makes me engage with the tool. It makes me learn more. I'm rewarded for learning more, so I'll keep learning rather than doing the minimum required to get through my course. It can link into good resources for parents and peers to get feedback from them as well. So the opportunities for that are really quite massive. At the moment, it's also an opportunity within that program to possibly look at some case-controlled evaluation around actual risk behaviour at the back end of it. So look at a control group that have gone through the program versus haven't, and what happens. That currently, to my knowledge, hasn't been undertaken yet. So there's a real opportunity there. And there's an opportunity to build on that program using some of the incentive assumptions within this. But this is a really neat program which I think we should be looking at to build on. In terms of a more mature incentive approach, we're very lucky. Like the Ride Forever program, and I was able to interview David Kilty within this, is really quite sophisticated. It's got neat outcomes. Most education programs like this, it's really hard to find one where they've actually done case-controlled crash outcomes, but this has done that. And some of the background into how they've worked out the incentive schemes and layered them is really clever. So I'm not saying let's just do Ride Forever. I'm saying some of the lessons that we could capture and shift to our other programs from this. What can we do that mimics this or learns from this program is the real key bit. You'd obviously have to adjust depending on your audience, but some of the work they've done is really neat. I sound like I'm just trying to promo this, but it is really good work. So the monetary side of it, so the extrinsic stuff around the registration cashback and the excess reductions in insurance schemes are really quite clever. In terms of the registration cashback aspect, a lot of riders feel that the high registration costs associated with the motorbike, which is higher than a car, and it's because it's risk-based assessment, which is good, but they felt it was unfair if they were safer riders. So this gives these riders the opportunity to do this course, prove that they're safer riders, and then get recognised for that safer riders. So it's not just an extrinsic monetary feedback, it's something that's providing the rider themselves with fairness, a feeling of fairness around the fee that they're being charged to be able to ride on our roads. The insurance component was really clever as well, talking about it being a win-win for the insurance company. So because this was so well evaluated, because they knew that they were getting 7,000 people through the program each year, the program was growing, the brand loyalty around the program, the net provider score around the other people recommending that they knew it was going to grow, and the evidence that they're going to have people within this group are going to have fewer claims and lower injury costs from the claims, that was just a win-win. So they've got 5 insurance companies now linked in with the excess reductions built into the scheme. So that's a really good example of getting into that private space with a public education campaign that we could really learn from in other spaces. So could that be done in other spaces? What do the insurance companies need to get it across the line to make it that win-win scenario that has been done here? They had all of the good stuff around as you get to be a better rider, bronze, silver, gold badges got awarded, and there was a pin, visible pin that went alongside this that you could wear. And David talked about an example of riders meeting at a cafe as they do, and it becoming a conversation starter. So you're a gold rider. Well, I've only done my silver. So it becomes a conversation starter as well as everything else. So it's built into the recognition around doing the course as well, and the socialization that goes along the course, something that I've done with you together. As we probably find organisationally when we do training courses as a group together and everyone in the organisation goes through it. Similarly, this is a cluster of people that have gone through the same thing. So it becomes social as well as everything else. E-roads, which Joel tapped into as well. So this is where drivers were provided with instant feedback on their driving performance, so they can just adjust their driving immediately, and managers are also provided with the dashboard and reporting at the individual and fleet level. So you've got both instant feedback and you've probably got delayed feedback as well. So overall, this data, at least it was case studies from the E-roads website, showed 94% fewer speeding events overall. So that's great. How they've delivered the incentives is a bit of a mix in terms of organisationally. There's a mix of looking at competition environments, leaderboards, gamification, direct positive feedback messages from trusted peers or from your direct manager. All of the stuff indicates that the combination of the in-vehicle plus the organisational incentives is what's working well. And to look now overseas to build on that, there's some neat work done by this organisation, if you haven't heard of it, called the National Road Safety Partnership Program, the NRSPP, in Australia. And that what they're doing is providing a national body that offers organisations knowledge sharing, resources, collaboration, and with the goal of improving organisational safety culture. So within this, they've got some really neat repository of case studies, especially and quite a sophisticated examination of how organisations can build on that in-vehicle stuff and the other data that they collect to actually look at organisational incentives, which ones are working better, and building on that. So in terms of the benefits and why we should look at incentives as a workplace or an organisation, there's a really neat list on the right-hand side I won't go into. But in terms of some of the power of incentives that comes through, that recognition from peers and managers is linked really strongly to our positive self-image when we're in an organisation, that tangible stuff. So I really liked the links to promotional ability and also having a better vehicle. So I get the newer model vehicle when it's coming through faster than you because I'm a safer driver. Thinking about how you embed safety into those tangible incentives links into our self-actualization around we want to achieve and we're getting recognized for achievement. And then there's the monetary side as well. So I'll just jump into one example just to give you a bit more flavor to that, and the case studies that are sitting there are really neat if you get a chance to look at that stuff or if you are working in that space. So the use of a layered incentive program again. So the Metropolitan Express Transport Services is one of the case studies. They had A-level drivers. So those are the drivers that who had shown safer driver behaviour, and they were consequently considered for promotion. There were monetary incentives, so direct increases in remuneration associated with progression through that safe driver program, and then disincentives as well they had. So demotion to a lower category if they aren't meeting the requirements, and a conversation around that obviously. Outcomes, fewer insurance claims, and reduced average cost of claims, so that severity of injury, so indicating perhaps speed was lower. So overall, we've got a range of recommendations. I won't go into all of them today. I'll focus on the Road to Zero ones. For those that are interested, you can look at the report. It's actually not too long. I think there's mainly about 50 pages of content in there, but it's got recommendations again around how do we do better funding for this stuff? How do we monitor the effectiveness of our existing initiatives like the Drive program, and also some of the tips around how do we deliver an incentive framework follows best practice. But just for today, I'll go into quickly five recommendations and then I'll wrap up. So we're almost there for your Friday. Looking at road user choices, work-related road safety, and speed management. So again, linking back to our focus areas so that hopefully some of this work can get slid nicely into the Road to Zero programs, monitoring, and hopefully case studies of success. So develop a suite of initiatives that incentivize safer driving behaviours. And the focus area here, because we wanted these recommendations to be a bit more targeted, was looking at younger drivers. So that immediate feedback loop from in-vehicle technology, that technology plus feedback from a trusted other person, like a parental figure or guardian, to encourage safer driver behaviours. There's also some really good in Aotearoa, New Zealand mentoring programs as well, which offer another outlet to get that feedback into our younger drivers. Financial incentives, so that's tapping into what can we learn from getting insurance or registration discounts for this group of drivers that are earned based on the evidence of safer driving indicators. So if I can show that I've got safer speed, no traffic offences or no crashes for a period of time, I'm earning that. And then the gamification stuff that I talked about, which sort of gets into that recognition of safer driver skills or levels, sharing with influential peer groups, that sort of things that the Drive program picks up on really nicely. Other incentives, other recommendations, sorry, explore opportunities that increase participation and engagement with existing driver safety education programs. So that drive program is a really good example of that. How could we build on that, make it stronger? Partnering with insurance companies, again, thinking about the Ride Forever example, how do we do more of that? That's a really good model. And looking at in-vehicle objective evidence of safer driving behaviour. So it's that pay how you drive model, especially around elements like speed is really where that in-vehicle one works beautifully. Creating public-private governance groups. So that's picking up on that case study, that lessons from the Australian group, the NRSPP. This is a real opportunity to shift our organisational safety culture and also make it easier for organisations to do this stuff. Like there's really good safety managers that are looking after fleets in our organisations already. How can we make this easier on them to pick up what's working? How can we share those good lessons around what works and what doesn't? So that process is really good. And how do they get support or buy-in from managers higher up that isn't quite on their radar quite as much? That delivery of national fleet recognition awards starts bringing in organisational reputation, which higher level managers are concerned about, that prestige associated with it. You could even lean into starting looking at preferred contract providers based on safer fleets and things like that as well, going further down the track. But that's a real opportunity for doing that smarter. And that Australian group, grabbing some lessons from that seems like a really smart idea. I know some people like Paul at ACC are already looking at how we could embed that. Final one, and we'll wrap up, infrastructure and speed management. So we already have some neat tools in our speed management guide, leaning into great examples like this Brisbane one with this Slow for Sam campaign. And there's plenty of other ones as European examples in our report as well, where this is really working. It does need to be thought about or considered where it gets rolled out. So schools, residential zones, places where there's perceived risks to vulnerable others as where that should be targeted to start from in terms of not only where this is effective, but also where it can really reduce harm on our urban network. So capturing some of that would be good. Brisbane had already rolled out, I think, 180 of these, and they'd moved them between multiple sites. So you can also move the signs. So this is something to consider in terms of how we're already doing our environmental feedback, but building on it with incentives. And I guess some of the Slow for Sam stuff's quite cool in terms of people are curious and wanting to get the win from seeing what the next thing is. So they've done some stuff around Halloween and Easter and Christmas to make it interesting and engage your curiosity around what the sign's going to do next. Just to acknowledge my other co-authors, Edgar Pacheco, Louise Malcolm, and the neat research team with Malcolm and Co, Ian and others from the steering group, the peer reviewers and the expert interviewees and editors. A warm thank you to all of your hard mahi in the background to get this report where it is.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jared and Joel. So there's plenty to consider there, especially for policymakers. I think you alluded to a number of the challenges we're facing, particularly around young people, and I liked the reference to, we really want people to go through the GDLS to be able to access it and to progress and come out at the other end as safe drivers. We know there's a few challenges in that happening, but I think this work will definitely help inform that. We got a few comments. I'll just take them in the order that they were posted. So Joel, when you were presenting on some of the initiatives around the peer groups, particularly around drink driving, Tom Eates made the observation that is this actually a positive thing, given that it could potentially lead to disapproval or social ostracism, etc. So I don't know if you want to clarify your question, Tom, but if not, I think it's one for Joel to address.
I mean, what Tom's talking about is effectively what is your social group, how does that impact your behaviour? And we know your social group has a huge impact on your behaviour. As Claire points out beneath, it's if your peer group is saying, hey, drink driving is perfectly fine, we do it all the time, then that's positive reinforcement of a behaviour that we don't want to continue along with. But if you are put in with a group that you can identify with in an environment where you're all going, we need to change our behaviour, so these are your peers, but all your peers are in a place where we're having to move forward to try and have better driving behaviour, that works as well. So it's all dependent on what that peer group is doing, how you relate to it as well. If I put you in a room full of people that you just don't relate to at all, you'll probably find that their impact on you is minimal to nothing.
I was going to just add to that, just to say that when you put up the slide about the different kinds of penalties that were available, I would have thought that that would be one sort of penalty. So one of the challenges that you described in different phases of the presentations that have been talked about today is the significance of a sort of social dynamic. But are there programs that actually encourage people to speak up, put their hands up? Because that's one of the kind of hurdles that needs to be overcome. People say, actually, that's not cool. When it's kind of perceived as a social norm, or you've got some of those characters who are quite extrovert or quite dominant to actually say, no, I'm not sure about that. They don't think that's a good idea. They actually need that sort of support and process to actually stick their hands up. So I was wondering whether when you looked at that, both as a penalty, as something that is likely to reduce the rate of recidivism, whether you'd considered options and review programs that tried to make it more likely that people would do that. So whether you've assessed the effectiveness of those kinds of programs.
So that would probably be more. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, can we please stop the recording for the Q&A?
Oh yeah, thank you for reminding me.
Thank you.
Let me just do
Yeah,
that.
I think it's a Chatham House rules. what